You got a man? Last school year, I transferred universities from a local college to a huge college about 3 hours from where I live. First year students aren't allowed to have cars unless it's a special circumstance when they live on campus, need it for work, etc. As someone who lived on campus, I had no car, and my only option to get home for the weekends occasionally was to go downtown and take the Greyhound bus. One weekend I was on the bus returning to my university, and I had 2 seats to myself since the bus wasn't super crowded. I turned sideways so that my back was against the bus window, and was watching Grey's Anatomy on my laptop. When I looked up, a guy who was sitting diagonal from me was sitting the same way I was and was staring at me. At first, I brushed it off like, oh, maybe just looking out the window, and resumed what I was doing, but every time I looked up, he was still staring. Occasionally, he would close his eyes and look like he was napping, but it was like he knew I was looking at him, because then he would open his eyes again and keep looking in my direction. The guy then proceeded to start talking to me after a little while. I was as nondescript as I could be, giving him very little to no personal information about myself, because he was creeping me out. Thankfully, it wasn't long after that the bus arrived to its destination, so I hurriedly gathered my things, told the guy to have a nice day, and bolted off the bus. I hid in the bathroom for a while, hoping that when I left to meet my friend who was picking me up from the station that he would be gone. I went outside and waited around the corner for my friend. I was standing there when all of a sudden, I hear someone yelling my name. I foolishly told the guy my first name. I never remembered to use fake names, and he was calling for me. I stood there, and I pretended I didn't hear him, but he was walking towards me. I didn't really have anywhere else to go, so I stood there as he approached me and started talking to me again. He got unnervingly close to me and kept asking if I had a boyfriend, and I told him yes, which is true. He went on saying things like how he'd treat me right, and that the guy I was dating didn't deserve someone so beautiful, and by this time, I was standing with my back against the brick wall, and he was a few inches from me. I started to panic, when thankfully a security guard of some sort was walking out of the bus gate next to us, and was looking at the situation that was happening. The guy instantly must have taken it as a threat because he just looked at me and smiled and winked, and then walked off. I heaved a sigh of relief, and continued to wait for my friend, which thankfully wasn't much longer after that. Scariest moment of my life, to be honest. Never going to the Atlanta Greyhound station again. As a vacation, 2 of my friends and I decided to take a road trip from New York to New Orleans. However, as we wanted to save money, we decided to use the Greyhound and make a few stops with a couple of days in each before reaching New Orleans. However, at the Atlanta Greyhound station, that was the most afraid for my life that I've ever been. In full disclosure, I must say this was due to a stupid reason. Once reaching the station, we arrived at night to Atlanta, and I cannot remember the exact time, seeing as this happened 8 to 9 years ago. But I believe it was past 11 p.m. closer to midnight. The hotel was not far at all from the bus station. After using our maps, we made the decision that we'll walk as it's not that far. Having lived in a big city in the States, I should have known better. We were approached by a man with an available cab, but we said no thanks and continued walking as the cab driver seemed to have a certain vibe about him. Now imagine the scene, 3 well-to-do young men dragging large suitcases down a very bad part of the city. From the station we started walking, and in less than a minute, we were approached by this lady who I'm pretty sure was on crack, and she seemed to have the features. She kept on saying that she needs some money and that if we go with her, she'll show us a good time. We repeatedly said no and pick up speed. The crackhead lady dropped back, but we frequently checked behind us as we were feeling very, very unsafe. That is when we noticed 3 guys in bandanas walking 10 to 20 feet behind us. When we stopped to adjust our suitcases, they stopped, and that is when panic really set in. All this, and we barely were out of the station. Just then, the crackhead lady comes back and more aggressively tells us that she needs some money, still promising that she'll make it worth it. All this commotion seemed to get the attention of one of the local bouncers at a strip club, which is near the station as well. This guy was massive and immediately started yelling at the crackhead lady to get away from us. After some back and forth, another man, who seemed to be friends with the crackhead lady, walks over and starts loudly arguing with the bouncer. A local security officer from the station saw all this chaos that happened with a large man and two shifty characters arguing, and with three guys in the middle holding suitcases. All this as we barely were away from the station at all. The security officer lectured us about walking away from the station at night and strongly recommended we get a cab to where we were going. By this time, the three bandana guys were nowhere to be seen, but even so, the officer luckily walked us back to the station. At the taxi area, the man who we originally said no to was still there, and the officer told him to drive us. We should have felt better now that we were in the cab, but we soon felt justified as to why we didn't feel right about the cab driver. Once he exited the station and did a few turns, he punched the accelerator and immediately started mumbling to himself. What should have been a very short cab ride took at least a few extra minutes. Only after we said for the third time that we were heading away from where we needed to go did he turn around and stop outside the hotel. Granted, he was pissed, and that is why he decided to take the long way to the hotel, but we thought it was that it was so close to the station. In the cab, he has controls for self-locking the doors, and we could see that he had already locked all the doors. After mumbling to himself for about half a minute, we started hitting the steering wheel. We were already on edge, but we were back to sheer panic mode. He then said in a loud but not shouting kind of way, "Before, when I offered you, you said no. What was that? Is there something wrong with the way I look? Like, what the fuck did you not get in the cab but instead decided to take off?" We explained to him that we thought the hotel could be easily reached on foot and that we were not familiar with Atlanta. After paying him with a reasonable tip, not to piss him any further, like, to be honest, we got out and fast walked it to the hotel up the entrance path. As we exited the car, I looked to the side of us at the road, and there he was, outside the cab, leaning against the passenger side of the car and just staring at us with a mean look in his eyes. Not only after checking in did we find the hotel a bit sketchy, but we were petrified that the cab driver was still outside. Despite barricading the door out of fear, none of us slept peaceful that night. We switched hotels to a nicer one in the city the next day, and if I ever go to Atlanta again, never will I ever take the bus. He was stalking us like we were his prey. I loved the sub and figured I would offer my own creepy encounter. It was probably around 10 p.m. one summer night when I was hanging out with two of my neighbors, Rick and Jeffrey. Both were very aloof and in their own retrospective universes. But while Rick had a very peaceful nature, Jeffrey is sort of a crazy and says some pretty fucked up shit sometimes. We're all skinny white boys. Just some background information. Anyways, they had both gone to colleges out of town, while I went to a university in town. So it was nice for us to be all hanging out and catching up at Jeffrey's house across the street. After a little while, Jeffrey informed us that one of his friends, Raj, was coming to spend the weekend with him from their college. Raj had never been to our city before, which is a pretty major city, so Jeffrey felt like we had to give him the best, most memorable experience ever. Rick was just along for rides as usual, and at the time, I was always looking for trouble, so we all agreed to give Raj a fun visit. So, at around 10 or 11 p.m. at night, we began plotting for his friend's arrival before leaving to pick him up from the Greyhound bus station. Blunts, tobaccos were rolled, and we ended up deciding to take him downtown to give him a glimpse of the city and the nightlife. We were all natives, but since I'd spent most time in the town at college, I was delegated to be the city navigator. So we ended up rolling out of Jeffrey's driveway in his mom's car. I'm shit with cars, but it was a large 4-door SUV type of car, the type that has 2 to 3 rows of seats and a big trunk. His mom was a feisty Latina woman and was notorious for taking turns at 1,000 miles an hour and even killing neighbors' dogs due to her reckless driving. Anyways, it's a big MF car. We were driving and joking, happily getting closer to the bus station and further into one of the shadier sides of town. And I mean this in the two ways. It was both parts ghetto and dark, like it was really, really dark tonight. It must have been a new moon as well, as cloudy or something. It was spooky. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Greyhound buses, they're a cheap way for people to travel between cities, and they don't have the best reputation. So, needless to say, the crowd at the Greyhound bus station at night, around midnight, was sketchy as fuck. So there we see Raj, a skinny Indian guy with his backpack and suitcase, standing nervously a good distance apart from several individuals who were apparently performing a drug transaction of some sort. This should have been our warning to just go home, but of course, when Raj hopped in the car, we all announced our grand plan to go downtown. Raj is excited to see Jeffrey, so we start to head downtown. I direct us to a nice park with a view of the skyline, just across the water from downtown. Although we are literally right off of a major street, the park and the parking lot are off to the side and had hardly any light illuminating the area. Also, we're right next to the bridge, which has a pedestrian walkway. It is really dark, but all is well. We're all acquainted with each other and feeling great. We decide to sit at some bench towards the far end of the parking lot, away from the entrance, and spark up a blunt. I think I was the first to notice it pulling into the parking lot. It would have been offensive to call this shitmobile a car. Even though it was dark, I could see the peeling paint, duct tape windows, and mismatched tires. And it was moving slowly, like creeping along, but kind of all over the place, going in no particular path. And the strangest thing of all was that the front passenger door was open while the car was still moving. I pointed it out to my friends, and we were all watching the car move when BAM! Somebody suddenly falls out of the open door and lands on the asphalt. I can see that it is a young woman that is well dressed, and as if she came from a college party. She gets up in a flash and takes off running barefoot while holding a pair of heels. From what I could tell, she ran straight into the lake and probably starts swimming for the other side. It is swimmable, so we're all thinking, holy fuck. Meanwhile, the shitsmobile has parked next to the only other car in the entire parking lot. Ours. A tall, muscular black man gets out of the shitmobile. He's wearing a wife-beater chain and baggy jeans. He begins looking in every single one of Jeffrey's car's windows while we sit on our bench about 40 yards away, smoking our blunt and looking in complete horror at what was happening. I keep my cool. I turn to Jeffrey, Rick, and Raj and tell them that we should take a walk. The farthest path from the shitmobile and its driver was a staircase that led up onto the pedestrian bridge, which then either lets you walk all the way across the lake to downtown or back into the parking lot that we originally parked in. We walked up the steps and walked about 20 yards towards downtown and finished smoking while high up on the bridge. We nervously chattered about what we saw. Yeah, boys, that was some crazy shit, right? Ha ha ha. We killed a blunt and decided to go home, walking back to the car by doubling back and walking past the steps and down the rest of the pedestrian bridge into the parking lot. We're walking down the pedestrian bridge. We all had a pleasant buzz, and the rest of the guys were about 10 steps ahead of me. As Sally talking about who the fuck knows, I remember having a stupid little smile on my face when I sort of instinctively looked over my shoulder and saw it. The motherfucker was right behind us, probably 20 or 30 feet back, and he wasn't just walking, he was stalking us as if we were his prey. His legs were bent, and he was taking quick, silent steps. His shoulders were arched and his hands seemed to be at the ready to do something bad. He's closing ground, and quickly, no one else is aware of his presence. I try to play cool again. I psst the guys in an effort to get their attention. Jeffrey turns around with a big fucking smile on his face and is wiped clean when he sees it. Jeffrey's eyes go wide before he turns around and takes off running. The fight or flight or flight or flight completely took over. We ran as fast as we fucking could down the pedestrian bridge. We still had 50 yards or so of parking lot to cross before we got to the car. I start panicking in my head. Is he behind me? What if he catches me? What if the car isn't unlocked? Luckily, Jeffrey didn't freeze and get the car manually unlocked in time. We all frantically piled into the car when we saw that yes, he was indeed chasing after us. He reached the front of the car by the time we barely got inside, and Jeffrey started the engine. He approaches the hood of the car. He pulls up his wife beater to reveal a gun and what looked like a fake sheriff badge in his waistband. Step on the gas, Jeffrey. I don't care if you fucking kill him. Just go! I screamed. He listens to me. The tires give a piercing squeal against the ground as the car lurches forward as fast as it can. Our predator sidestepped out of the way at what had to have literally been the last second and then punched the window really, really hard while we bolted past him. I glance behind me through the rear window and see him looking really fucking pissed and frustrated that we got away. That freaked me out almost more than the rest. His disappointment that we escaped. I instruct Jeffrey to drive us past as safely as possible through a series of back roads and detours that I knew about, just in case the shitmobile decided to follow us. I wasn't worried about getting pulled over. We were all scared shitless anyways. I end up navigating us out of downtown and back to Jeffrey's house. Once we get out of the car, we had a giant group hug. where we acknowledged that what had happened and celebrated that we made it back safely. Another neighbor friend walked up on that and had no idea what to think of 4 guys having a group hug in the driveway at like 1 a.m. in the morning. Needless to say, I don't think Raj enjoyed his visit very much, as he ended up isolating himself in Jeffrey's own home and left early. Bus stop experience. So this is my first post to the subreddit, and after scaring myself silly all night reading this, my ex-partner reminded me of one that happened to me when I was 15, now 19, when I live in Kamloops, BC. I guess I had a pretty good job of pushing out of my mind, so on with my experience. My friend Nina and I were taking the bus to an upper area of Kamloops to the Greyhound station to meet my friend on her stopover. She had time to kill, and we were to hang out with her. It was a really beautiful summer day, as I recall, and we really enjoyed hanging out with my friend Priscilla for the half hour or so that we did. All I remember from our conversations is Priscilla's remark that Kamloops looks like a scummy town. I protested her comments, saying it was a great place to live. Eventually she got on the bus, and Nina and I made our way back to the bus stop. A bit of information about this bus stop: it was on a major, very busy, very populated road, and it was midday. So we went and sat down, waited for the bus, and lit a cigarette. In the fashion of being 15, we were gossiping and giggling, huddled together, when I noticed a man sitting on the other side of the bus bench. He was really normal looking, nothing remarkable about him either. He just looked like an average middle-aged man. We continued talking and laughing when our eyes stayed over at the man again. It took a second to register what exactly was going on, but he was masturbating in broad daylight on a main road. I gave Nina a look that somehow immediately made her look over her shoulder, and she screamed. The dude walked away, as if not a damn thing had happened. It didn't register for a long time how fucked that was. After a while, I started to have nightmares about it, but eventually got over it. Priscilla was right, though. Kamloops was definitely fucked up. I've had my fair share of frightening experiences there since then. Thanks for reading, dudes.